Thank you everyone, Pascal, for coming here. I know on Lower Accessibility Awareness Day there's a very bright offer for events you could attend to, and we are very happy that you joined this event. And I am also very happy that I got invited to present this evening with my partner in crime, Sue. Yeah, maybe a little bit about me. I am a UX UI designer specializing in accessibility for a couple of years now, and I am very much on the personal, in my personal life, into boxing and into knitting, which is something that doesn't look like the same, but that I have in common with Sue.
That's me. Nice to have you here. I'm Sue, and I'm a content designer at DigitalService with a big passion for plain language, I would say. And in my free time, as Marion already said, I also enjoy knitting. And I am also pretty much into singing, which I do as part of a nice choir that is also based here in Kreuzberg. And there's another thing we have in common. That is our project.
Exactly. That's the project we will work on. It's called service.justice.de. It's live. And yes, our ambition for this service is to make it the go-to places for service justice and also for citizens to access their rights in Germany. And before we get there, we need to launch a couple of services. So this is something we started to do with two services who help to provide financial support for legal aid or for legal procedures on the one hand, and our team specifically work on another service which enables people to claim compensation in case of flight cancellation or heavy delay. But tonight we are here to talk about accessibility, and usually when there is a presentation about accessibility, there's not more than 5 minutes before we start to talk or to mention the WCAG, which is the Web Accessibility Content Guidelines. And one thing that is good to know about the Web Accessibility Content Guideline is their structure. And the structure is around 4 main pillars. The first one is the perception. The second one is the understanding. The third one is to operate. And the fourth one is robustness. And basically those 4 pillars are used to distinguish the different guidelines who are enacted by the people who write the standards for the web to make it understandable, hopefully, what can make a website accessible. And tonight we're just going to focus on one aspect of this, which is to understand. And for us, working in the public sector, it is really a challenge, because what we very soon got confronted, or I personally, my experience got confronted with starting to work at DigitalService, is the gap that exists between the reading level of the German people and the communication level of the German administration. I see some people have experience here, know exactly what I'm talking about. That's great. I'm still going to explain a little bit more this graph, where you can see in white or in the lighter shades the reading level of the German population according to a study which dates back from 2011. Maybe some things have changed, but still remains around B1 and B2. But in comparison, the language that is mostly heavily used in communication of companies and administration is rather around C1. So there is a huge gap here that is actually the reason why it's so important to have a content designer in your team to help you work on that. Can you tell us more about content design then?
Yeah, sure, Mario. I love it. So, having this in mind, you might think, well, where's the problem? Just take all these bureaucratic information out there and translate it into plain language. But, of course, this is not always this easy, and maybe the most and the biggest challenge in our field of working, and for me personally as a content designer in my everyday work, is finding the right balance between legal accuracy on the one side and easy understandable copy on the other side. So in the end, it's all about figuring out and discussing with our project partners questions like what's the core information here and what could be omitted without losing legal accuracy, where the users maybe need additional explanations and extra guidance, what are fixed legal terms we just simply have to stick to, and where do we have a bit freedom to replace complicated legal phrases with more easy understandable words, and so on and so on. And when I used to work in the private sector before, this is one chart I kind of really liked when it comes to describing what writing for UX means, because I think it's, it just brings it to a very simple and tangible point. And according to this, UX writing lies at the very interface between formal written language and the more informal spoken language we use in our day-to-day conversations. And then, of course, it's our challenge to meet this sweet spot in the middle. And to get a bit more practical here, we also brought you some examples from our current project. And one of the most important principles when it comes to creating easy understandable content is to make it easy scalable. And here we brought an example of what we got as the kind of raw material input from our legal experts and project partners. This is a lot of information we needed to integrate in an information page we created. And on this information page, basically users can find out what it means to claim without a lawyer, what our product is basically all about. So yeah, as you can see, a lot of text, a lot of information, not really nice to read through, and that's what we made out of it in the final iterated version. So yeah, okay. On first sight, it may seem surprising because you see it kind of looks even longer than before, but sometimes giving good structure is also not just simply shorten everything. So what did we do instead? We clustered all the information into meaningful chunks. We made it also visually scannable by using the list items here, and we added a speaking headline and also sub-headlines that point out the key message of each section for the users, so that even those users who don't read through all the details but just scanning through the page will get the most important key points there. Yep.
Yes, and I want to bring some sort of like counter perspective or additional perspective to that. With another page that we designed, where by the end of the formula, people who are eligible for compensation may fill out to generate a lawsuit. We have this summary page where all the information they put in the page is repeated, so that they can verify that all the information they put here is exactly what they wanted to have appearing in the lawsuit. And so obviously there's a lot of it's a very long page as well, and it has a lot of structure. And here it's interesting to consider the perspective of also people using those screen readers, because we know that they tend to navigate a lot or understand actually the structure of the page using the list of headings. So in HTML, we use the H1, H2, H3, and usually you have one H1 for the whole page, but then you have to make sure that the structure of the page reflects the structure of the content you wanted to give it. So on this page, for instance, we have a H1 here, which was the main title of the page, and then below we have a section for flight data, which is using H2, and below there was a subsection for address of the airline, and then under it another H4 for the name of the airline, and then again with the data related to the planned flights, and then again more H4. And actually the feedback we got from a screen reader user is there is way too many headings there and it's confusing. So in the end, we learned from this experience that yes, it's important to be structured, but sometimes you really have to consider that titles are those orientation points and that too much is also not so great. So we readjusted that using by replacing the original H4 by definition list, which is also like a semantic element, so it will be conveyed as something that that is not like unsemantic, like a div would be, which doesn't convey any information, but it will still be announced as something that has a meaning to screen reader users, but it will not be listed in the list of headings. Right. So that's it for my example.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so getting back to our big challenge, sometimes the best solution for this is finding a good compromise. As it was the case in this example here, what you can see here is one of the questions users encounter when they use our tool to create a digital claim. So at one point they are asked if they want to apply for a so-called Versäumnisurteil, which is a judgment by default in English, if maybe anybody knows about it. And of course, as you can imagine, most users don't know what a Versäumnisurteil is. So we try to offer them a legal valid explanation, but had to learn in the user tests that it was still too confusing to them, too much info and just not helpful enough. But then we had also our project partners on the other side, which said us, no, it's the complete opposite and it's not even enough information, and we also need to include all the specific cases in which the courts are actually allowed to issue this kind of judgment. So yes, we had to find a compromise, and this is what we came up with. So what we did is we added a very brief explanation above the legal accurate content, so to say. And we even marked it with the words simply explained, einfach erklärt. And what it does, it kind of reflects the most core important point of the whole thing in just one sentence. And besides that, we also added the legally important details about the specific cases in which this Versäumnisurteil can be issued, and we put it into an accordion. So this way we ensured that we are legally correct, and we also gave users who are, I don't know, keen on getting all the details to find the answer there, while not overwhelming all the others with a heavy information overload on first sight. And and what was really, really cool also for us is that in the final user tests, users really liked this, and they especially appreciated this einfach erklärt pattern, which of course made us happy too.
Right, and so when it comes to being helpful and orienting people, I'm still gonna bring again the perspective of screen reader users here, because we'll be testing with them for this product. If you can imagine that so I mentioned like screen reader user might use the headings to understand the structure of the page, but another way they might navigate the page when they can't see it is using the navigations. And so they can, the navigation are part of something called landmarks, and the problem is like when you have different navigation, which often occurs on the web page, then all of them kind of need a different name. And in the beginning, when we tested this first version, we had those different names. So, for instance, the first navigation on the page, the one in the header, was called Hauptnavigation, and then we had the breadcrumb navigation, and then we had the footer navigation. And the feedback we got from a user is, what is a breadcrumb? So it kind of like told us that on the one hand, like we should not use English for things that are also not visible if the product is aimed as a German-speaking people. And then also we had to tackle this very difficult question of like, how do you explain what a breadcrumb navigation is to people who maybe don't have the technical background to really understand what it is. So in the end, we went for this working title. If you have better suggestions, we are open. We renamed the main navigation by Oops Menu. The breadcrumb, we use the term Seitenpfad. And then for the footer, instead of highlighting like the location, we try to aim for a name that would rather convey what people can find in this navigation. So because in there you only have links to the data protection or the Barrierefreiheit, the accessibility statement, then we decided to name it legal information navigation. Right. So trying to make it less technical can be very challenging, but it's also something to think about when you're designing those products and considering the non-visual experience, that it's not because people use assistive technology that they are really on point with, or they speak the same language as you do. Yeah, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and if you remember the picture we had in the beginning, and we would like to transfer this to the public sector in general, it could also look a bit like this, where we have the bureaucratic language versus the everyday citizen used language, and then we aim for the center in the middle and use what we would call bürgernahe Sprache, citizen-centered language. And here we also brought an example which I think not only shows the difference between bureaucratic language and citizen-centered language, but also how important it is to use consistent language. What you can see here is like the first step users encounter when entering our digital Klage tool. And when they land here, on first sight, it looks good. They feel reassured because it's all about the Klage. You can see the word Klage all over the place. It's in the headline, it's in the breadcrumb navigation, and so on. But if you zoom in and take a closer look at the description below, we suddenly speak of the Klage Schrift. And of course, this had a reason. It's again the law experts that told us, yeah, well, technically, legally, it's only a Klage as soon as you have filed it with the court, and before that, it's only the Klageschrift. And whenever we are talking about the actual PDF document users are getting in the end, we would need to call it Klageschrift to be legally super correct. Yeah, but of course, the users didn't find it that funny. On the contrary, they found it really confusing and also a bit unsettling, but because, I mean, of course, they were wondering, like, Klageschrift, is it the same thing? What do I get in the end? Then is it the real final Klage I can use for sending it to the court, or is it just a drafted version and I have to take some extra steps to make it valid. So questions like this were raised, which was good for us because with this in the back end, we finally could convince our project partners to sacrifice a little bit of the legal accuracy for the sake of the users, and then we could go with the more simplified but a lot more common word Klage everywhere through the whole product journey, which was an improvement, of course.
But again, like sometimes you have to balance also how much consistent you can be, or it makes sense to be. So I have this example from the data protection page. I don't know if any of you have been designing the data protection page, but there's a lot of content there. There's a lot of content there. And so for us, the goal was to make it also as understandable as possible. So obviously, relying on list item was making a lot of sense. Also to remain concise and yet as much as possible digestible. So when we had this section about this section explaining what kind of personal data would be used with our service, we immediately thought about using the list items to basically draw this these contents in a bite-sized way, and we were happy because it looked sharp and neat. But then when we tested with screen reader users, we learned that it was kind of weird for them that some list items or some lists only had one items in there, and this is where also we realized this sometimes limitation between what is nice and consistent and written in a way, and how you would sometimes explain things when you're splitting them up. So this kind of like boundary. So in the end, we deleted the additional list item that didn't have the list that had only one list item, and we made a sentence out of it, just to keep it also logical for our users. Yes, and then I think it's the last example we had. So then we can go on to the conclusions, right?
That's true. Yeah, let's start. To close our talk, we brought some takeaways and learnings, of course, and the first and one for me, and it sounds so simple, but it's so helpful. Whenever I am dealing with very complex information that needs to be communicated to the users, it's the best thing to ask this question and ask yourself first, how would I explain it verbally, in my own words, to a friend or a family member or someone who's not an expert on the topic, because this gives you a very first but also very natural hint of what are the key points for you and what you would simplify and what you maybe would even leave out in your explanation. And that's really, really helpful, I would say. The second one also seems to be obvious, but couldn't be more important, especially when it comes to working together with stakeholders, experts, project partners. So always be flexible, be open for compromises. You will win nothing in the end, especially not for your users in the long run, if you just don't get along with your project partners and strictly insist on your point of views all the time. But on the other side,
yeah, pick your battles. I think it's, for me, the most difficult thing to really do consciously and purposefully, but it's a skill, and you have to get it to survive, basically, I would say. It's about like understanding like what is worth in the moment where you are right now to push for, and what's in the end is maybe not something for right now, and doesn't feel that it is a defeat if you don't get what you would like to get at that moment of time, but just keep the hope that it will come. And there also what might be helpful is to realize how far you came sometimes with the progress you've done on a topic, even if you didn't get as much as you wanted to get. I think it's something very important that you can apply everywhere, also beyond accessibility. And the last one for me that is so important to remind, might seem also super obvious probably to designers crowd, but you are not the users, and I really want to connect that with the WCAG I was mentioning in the beginning of this talk, because if you look into the guidelines for understanding, especially into the level of law that is required, there's not so much things about making your content understandable for your audience, sadly, and it has also been recognized that, especially considering people who might have like cognitive disability, it's really hard to come up with guidelines or criteria that are applicable and could work in a framework like the one of the WCAG. So therefore for us it's so important to test, because it's kind of like the main way you can get input on whatever you write. And in the end, one of my main learning so far has been that yes, I'm designing, but I'm mostly designing for texts and with text, and text is the main thing I design for, so I should always consider that as the most important thing when I work on designs. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you for your attention.